Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the sweeping, absolutely wild history of India. We're going to unpack how thousands of years of profound wealth led to a shocking corporate conquest and ultimately an incredible triumph. From ancient philosophical breakthroughs to the hostile takeover of an entire continent by a single corporation, this is a story that fundamentally shaped the modern world we live in today. Let's get into it. Here is our quick roadmap for This Explainer. First, we'll look at ancient empires and marvels. Second, the corporate intruder. Third, from merchant to monarch. Fourth, rebellion and the Raj. And finally, the path to freedom. Section 1. Ancient Empires and Marvels. Just think about the sheer, massive sweep of history here. We're talking about thriving, golden age civilizations that were pioneering mathematics, major world religions, and incredibly complex cities long before the rest of the world even caught up. I mean, by 2600 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization was literally engineering underground drainage systems. Centuries later, you have Emperor Ashoka of the Maurya Empire building this massive unified state based entirely on nonviolence and moral law. And then under the Gupta Empire, visionary astronomers and mathematicians gave us the concept of zero. India was a land of staggering intellectual and material wealth. Now, to protect all of that unbelievable wealth, you obviously need some serious physical defenses, right? The Indians built these imposing, deeply intimidating structures. You had the Rators carving the colossal Mehrgarh fort straight out of an extinct volcano just to guard the Thar Desert trade routes. Way up in the Himalayas, the Dankar fort sat at 13,000 feet, guarding the silk routes like a literal eagle's nest. And in central India, there was the magnificent Gwalior fort. It's a 2.5-kilometer-long marvel that looked stunning on the outside, but actually hid these terrifying dungeons where Mughal emperors kept their political rivals in drug-induced stupors. All right, let's move to Section 2, the corporate intruder. Okay, wrap your head around this number, 150 million. That was the population of the unified Mughal Empire under Emperor Jahangir back in 1615. Just to put that into perspective for a second, that was more than the population of all of Europe combined. This was a sprawling empire of running fountains, marble pavilions, and treasuries that literally held more gold than every single king in Christendom put together. So the historical mismatch here is honestly absurd. Picture this. In 1599, England was basically a wet, cold island on the edge of Europe with just 2.5 million people, an empty treasury, and a totally broke King James. Meanwhile, Emperor Jahangir's personal income was 100 times that of the English king. When the first English ambassador, a guy named Sir Thomas Roe, arrived in India, he was just completely overwhelmed by it all. To the emperor, England was barely a blip on the map. So to really understand the fall of India, we have to clearly define the intruder. It wasn't a country, it was the East India Company, or the EIC. This was a scrappy, deeply profit-hungry corporation designed purely to extract wealth for its London investors. Founded in 1600 by pooling money in a small hall, it was the first joint stock company in modern history. They weren't a government, they were a business, armed with a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth that granted them a strict monopoly on Eastern trade. Their playbook was surprisingly simple and incredibly patient. Sir Thomas Roe learned it quickly. You definitely don't fight the Muggles. Instead, you establish roots, and you wait for the empire to weaken. You smile, you kneel, and you quietly bribe your way into getting a firman, which is basically a trading license. And crucially, they secured Bombay in 1668. Sure, it was a swampy island, but it had a deep-water port entirely outside of Mughal jurisdiction. There, the company could literally mint their own coins, build a fortress, and just safely wait on the margins. But when Emperor Aurangzeb died in 1707, that mighty Mughal empire slowly began to leak away. Regional governors stopped sending taxes, warlords invaded, and the unified state completely shattered. Which leaves us with one massive, overarching question. How exactly does a corporation take advantage of that chaos to conquer an entire continent? Which brings us to Section 3, from merchant to monarch. Here's the wild thing about this corporate conquest. The EIC's greatest weapon wasn't gunpowder, it was turning India's own immense financial wealth and internal conspiracies against itself. Look at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The Nawab of Bengal had this massive army, 50,000 men, armored elephants, that should have crushed the company's 3,000 troops in an hour. But an ambitious company clerk named Robert Clive allied with the Jagat Seths, the richest bankers in the world at the time. Using pure financial leverage, they literally bought off the Nawab's commanders. When they got to the battlefield, the Nawab's massive army simply stood still. The company won the battle without a real fight. And just like that, with one single signature on a piece of paper, the East India Company slithered from merchant to monarch. They completely weaponized the administrative tax system to extract fortunes. Following their military victories, they actually forced the blind, young Mughal emperor to sign a document called the Diwani. Almost overnight, a private trading company became the legal tax collectors of the richest province on earth. The company men became self-made multimillionaires, giving the English language a brand new, highly memorable word derived directly from Hindustani: loot. The grim reality of this corporate greed is absolutely chilling. While millions of people died in a famine engineered by asset stripping, the company paid out massive dividends to its shareholders. When the rains failed in Bengal, yes, it was a natural drought, but the resulting famine, that was corporate policy. Instead of offering relief, the company actually raised taxes by 10% to make up their shortfall, sending armed troops to enforce collection from starving peasants. Between 7 and 10 million people died, all while the company cheerfully rewarded its London shareholders. So, how do you pay for an empire like this? Well, the EIC essentially inverted the global financial system. They forced Indian peasants to grow opium to illegally sell to China, funding the largest empire in human history. You see, Britain desperately wanted Chinese tea, but China only wanted silver in return. So the company forced Indian farmers to replace their vital food crops with poppies. They manufactured the opium, smuggled it into China, created a devastating massive addiction crisis, and then used the silver from that to buy their tea. It was quite literally a global addiction economy orchestrated right out of a boardroom. Section 4. Rebellion and the Raj. Eventually, things hit a breaking point. The East India Company had trained this 250,000-strong army of Indian soldiers, known as sepoys. But extreme cultural insensitivity and exploitation finally caused these men to forcefully push back. The spark came in 1857 with a new Enfield rifle. Rumors spread that the cartridges, which you actually had to bite open to use, were greased with cow and pig fat. This profoundly defiled both Hindu and Muslim faiths. It sparked a massive, unified uprising across northern India. For 6 whole months, the company completely lost control of the region in what became the incredibly bloody First War of Indian Independence. What happened next was basically a hostile takeover. The birth of the British Raj meant the crown didn't invent imperialism here. It just openly embraced the bureaucratic machine the private company had already built. The British government deployed tens of thousands of regular troops to crush the rebellion. The illusion of a corporate partnership was shattered forever. In 1858, Queen Victoria officially dissolved the East India Company. But the brutal, extractive, administrative system, it remained entirely intact. The courts, the taxes, the armies, they literally just traded their company badges for the British crown. And finally, Section 5, the path to freedom. Despite every British effort to divide and rule them, the Indian people pushed back with a relentless, multi-generational campaign of resistance that spanned decades. It started with constitutional activism through the Indian National Congress in 1885. Over time, that evolved into massive public participation. You had revolutionaries embracing radical resistance, and millions more joining Mahatma Gandhi in acts of peaceful civil disobedience, like the famous Dandi March in 1930 protesting salt taxes. By 1942, the Quit India movement demanded an absolute immediate end to British rule. This culminated in 1947 with independence, though it was tragically accompanied by a violently painful partition. What's really fascinating here is the sheer contrast. You have this brutal, violently extractive corporate conquest of the EIC taking on Mahatma Gandhi's independence movement, which leveraged peaceful civil disobedience to dismantle the empire. Gandhi called it satyagraha, or truth force. It was a powerful method of nonviolent resistance that directly echoed the ancient philosophies of ahimsa, championed by figures like Emperor Ashoka thousands of years prior. It was a profound moral victory that resonated across the entire globe. So this rebirth culminated in the ultimate test, building a nation from scratch. They were forging the world's largest democracy, dedicated to pluralism and constitutional ideals. Leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and B.R. Ambedkar laid down a constitution in 1950 that established a sovereign, secular republic. They successfully integrated hundreds of princely states, rolled out massive economic reforms, and created a framework striving for real social justice and equality. They ushered India onto the modern global stage as an independent technological powerhouse, proving, for sure, that a nation can successfully rebuild even from centuries of extraction. I want to leave you with something to really chew on as we wrap up this explainer. History isn't just a bunch of dates in the past. It's the critical lens through which we absolutely must question our present. When we look back at how easily a profit-driven corporation weaponized information, bought out governments, and bypassed borders centuries ago, we really have to ask ourselves, how are those very same dynamics playing out in the boardrooms and global markets of today? Thanks for exploring this incredible journey with me.